All right, all you cool cats and kittens, I hope you can hear me now. I'll give it a second to let that catch up with the live stream. I'm just now seeing the comments saying that there was no sound, and I hope I've corrected that. Somebody give me a thumbs up or a good to go whenever you do start hearing some sound. I'll hold the line here for a moment or two to make sure that everybody can hear me. There we go. We see you now. Now there's no sound. Okay, working. All right, good to go. Great to see everybody tonight. Thanks for folks kind of watching out for the quality on your end. I just totally forgot to plug in that I'm using my Snowball microphone that gives some good, clear, warm sound, hopefully. So ready to get started here in Mark the 4th chapter. You'll notice there on the screen we're going to attempt to cover the remainder of chapter 4 and actually see if we can do all of chapter 5 tonight. So buckle up and let's get just a rolling. In Mark chapter 4, let's read here beginning in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, and let's just remind ourselves what had happened on that day. Well, the previous 34 verses of chapter 4 talk to us about Jesus as he was there doing some teaching from a boat because the crowds had pressed upon him. As the day wore on, the crowd kind of thinned out, and he had those who hung around and wanted to know more about the teaching, and he does all of those parables there in chapter 4. So on that day, as we got to the end of the day, he then said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And once again, remind ourselves, we're still talking here about the Sea of Galilee. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear, and they said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Now, this is a powerful little episode, and there's other details about this in Matthew's account and in Luke's account as well. We're just going to stick here with what Mark records for us here. The Sea of Galilee is not just some tiny little pond or a lake. It's actually a pretty big piece of sea. That's why I'm kind of more inclined to refer to it as a sea instead of just as a lake. It's about 8 miles wide and 15 miles long, or at least that's the measurements that we're going with today, and it would have probably been something comparable back then. So to get from one side to the other, considering that they didn't have, power boats and stuff with motors on them, this is not going to be the kind of trip that's just going to happen in 5 minutes. It's going to take a little bit to get from one side to the other. And let's be reminded as well, since we're not talking about boats that have, motors on them, let's also be reminded that this is not going to be some kind of big, luxurious cruise ship. This is a fishing boat. This is a boat that's designed to just do some work. Here's a picture, and I like this one, of a first century Galilean fishing boat, kind of based upon some artifacts and things that were discovered and found to try to get some ideas of what that would have been like. And I included this picture because you'll notice down there at the bottom there's kind of a scale of the size of a school bus and a delivery truck. A delivery truck, average delivery truck, maybe about 27 feet long. The length of a Galilean fishing boat maybe would have been about that, 26 feet long or something in that vicinity, and a bus would have been a little bit longer than that, 10 feet. This would be the kind of thing that maybe you could fit, 15 people in that, 15 passengers or so in this. So you've got Jesus, you've got the 12 apostles in there, and I put this picture on here as well to also show us that this is not the kind of boat where there would have been like levels on it, where there's like, an upper deck and a lower deck. Sometimes when we read that about Jesus being asleep in the stern. Maybe we picture, oh, okay, well, he's down in the lower deck, where maybe it's a little bit calmer and maybe he doesn't hear the storm going on outside. That's not what's going on here. The depth of a fishing boat like this, we're only talking like maybe 4 feet, 3 or 4 feet of depth. And so Jesus is there up on top with everybody else. When it talks about him being on the stern, that would have been a place, you notice the picture there on the right-hand side of your screen. Jesus is kind of down there toward the bottom. I assume that's who that's supposed to be. Kind of his face is illuminated a little bit. Just a stern where maybe someone would be able to sit and be able to have a cushion, maybe in a spot where they could deflect and kind of be shaded from the strong, rays of the sun on a daily basis. My point is, Jesus is up there on top, where all of the ruckus is going on, where the waves are beating and the winds are blowing and the rain is coming down and it's being rocked, and he's asleep. And this is the only place in the whole Bible where we're told that Jesus ever slept. Now, that's not to say that he didn't ever sleep on any other occasions. I'm sure that he did. He was a human. But this is the only occasion that we're specifically told that he's sleeping, and it's in the midst of just crazy, wild circumstances here. And we know that this must have been a pretty severe storm, just judging by the reaction of the disciples. Remember, several of these guys are professional fishermen. They know what it's like to be out in the middle of a stormy sea. They're not like, if I was out in the middle of that boat and I'd be, going crazy because I wouldn't know what to do. These are guys that they would have known what to do under normal circumstances with the storm going on. But this must have been a pretty severe one because they are in just an intense panic. And we know that because of what's said in verse 38 when they speak and they say, "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" We're fixing to die here. I mean, this is a dire circumstance, a dire situation. It seems entirely hopeless. And I'm going to emphasize the idea that this was seemingly a hopeless situation because the next 3 episodes that we're going to see here in chapter 5 are kind of some seemingly hopeless situations. But what we're going to see in all of these episodes is that through the power of Jesus, there is hope. And there is the possibility for a better day. And that's exactly what happens here with the great miracle that takes place when Jesus wakes up and he's not frazzled by the storm that's going on. He doesn't even tell these guys. The first words out of his mouth is not, "Hey guys, settle down, it's all under control." He doesn't really even have any interaction with them initially. The first things out of Jesus' mouth in verse 39 is, "Peace, be still." The Lord speaks, Jesus speaks, and the creation responds accordingly. Creation obeys the command of the Lord. And what we want to notice, we sometimes maybe would wonder, well, why is this recorded for us? Certainly, all of the miracles are recorded for us to demonstrate the great power that Jesus had, and that's going on here. We're seeing the power of Jesus exercising power over the natural realm, but maybe even more so, it's to emphasize and to impress upon these apostles who he really is. Because they are now coming to the realization, maybe more so than at any point prior to this, we're in the presence of God. That's what's going on here. We are in the presence of God himself. And in fact, I'm reminded of what's said in Psalm chapter 89 in verses 8 and 9, when the psalmist says, "O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you? You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them." That speaks of something that only God can do. That only God has the power to be able to speak to the raging sea or to speak to the waves of the sea and the wind and speak them still and to speak them calm. And if those guys that were sitting in that boat that day, if they had any knowledge of Psalm 89, lots of other passages, there's several other Psalms that talk about this kind of thing, then they would have started to connect some dots that we are in the presence of someone who is sent from God at the very least, and in a greater sense that it is God in the flesh. They are in the presence of divinity. And I want us to notice in verse 41 that it says that they were filled with great fear as they said these things. It doesn't say that the apostles, were joyful. Oh, hooray, he calmed the storm. It doesn't say that there was relief of, we're so thankful that this stopped. No, the disciples are afraid. And the reason I believe it says that they are afraid is because they are coming to understand of what it means to be in the presence of God. And that is the only appropriate response when we begin to recognize who God is and our place in relation to God. There's several other instances in the Bible, and I think specifically in the Old Testament, where some people had encounters with God, and there was that realization in their mind that I am in the presence of God. And the only right response was trembling and fear. I think about Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6 when he sees that just amazing vision of the Lord. And he falls down on his face and trembling. Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 3, he sees this amazing throne scene himself, and he falls down on his face. Daniel in Daniel chapter 8, same kind of thing, falls down upon his face in complete humility and subjection. That fear is the good kind of fear. It's a healthy kind of fear. It's reverent fear, and it's the kind of fear that leads to faith. And that's what the apostles are getting a good heavy dose of right here at this point in time in their relationship with Jesus, is godly fear that is producing in them a real sense of faith that this man is indeed sent from God. They're going to come to understand that he is indeed the Son of God. Tiffany's made the point that just reading these verses, it gives you chills because of his power, and that's exactly right. And we're going to be impressed throughout this section and all of chapter 5 of just the incredible power of Jesus to do things that no one else can do. The power of God on just full display, and we're going to learn from that. And we're going to see how that power helps us and how that benefits us as well. Dad cited here Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, that it is the fear of the Lord that is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. That's exactly right. That's where a relationship with God needs to begin. At least it's one of the beginning things, where we have a healthy, reverent fear and awe for God. Doesn't mean that we have to, cower and, oh, no, please, I don't even want to look at you, or I don't even want to talk to you. No, we don't have to have that kind of fear. But the kind of fear that says, yes, I'm in the presence of someone that is way more powerful than I ever am or will be, and I need to recognize my place in relation to him. That's chapter 4. Now, this is actually a good place for us to keep our study going, because chapter 5 just continues right along with that. It's this same scene in the boat. We're traveling to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and chapter 5 picks up right there now that they've made it to the other side. So let's pick up in chapter 5, verse number 1. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Verse 3, he lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Let's just stop right there as we are introduced to this man that we sometimes refer to as the Gerasene demoniac. And I'm not going to include pictures with this story, because if you do a Google search for images on the Gerasene demoniac, most of them are rather cartoonish, and I don't want us to have a cartoony image in our mind as we talk about this guy and as we talk about what it was that he was enduring. This is pretty serious business here. I've always found it interesting in verse 2 that it says that Jesus got out of the boat, but there's no mention of the disciples getting out of the boat and approaching this guy. And I've got a pretty good guess as to why maybe they didn't get out of the boat, because I'm not so sure that I'd want to get out of the boat with the description of this man as he comes rushing up as he's possessed with these demons, and emphasis on plural in demons there, because we'll talk about that in just a second. This man is a wild man. And one of the reasons it's good for us to look here at Mark's account as opposed to Luke's account, because Luke records this as well, Matthew does as well. Mark just explains in explicit detail just how out of control this man was, that nobody can do anything with this man. He has the power to snap chains, metal chains, maybe steel chains, to break them apart. That says to us that this man has supernatural strength because of the demons that are in him. He's been driven away from society. People are terrified of him, and maybe it's because some people recognize he's demon-possessed. Some people may just think he's just out of his mind, that he's just gone insane and just mentally he's not there. He's living alone amongst these tombs. He's cutting himself, and maybe that's the demons doing that. Maybe that's even the man reacting out of just trying to take his mind off of the pain that the demons are causing him, and so he begins to cut himself. He's howling night and day like some kind of an animal, and you just put all of that together. What a terror it would have been to live close to this man. And what a terror it would have been to have been in this man's shoes, or in this man's sandals, so to speak, to even have to live like this man was. And this passage, maybe more than any other passage in the Bible that talks about demonic possession, really impresses upon us the seriousness of what demons were able to do. There's lots about demon possession that we do not know, and I'm always the first to say that I don't know all that there is. I get lots of questions to discuss about demons for Q&A night, and lots of those just get put into the I don't know pile. But this passage illustrates that demons were, at their fundamental level, they were used by Satan to destroy people's lives. To wreak havoc on the lives of human beings, to disfigure, to demolish what had been created, people who were created in the image of God. And the devil was all about trying to destroy that, and he used demons to accomplish that. These demons have very literally taken this man. They've taken his life from him. They've isolated him away from other people. They've made it impossible for anybody else to be around him. They hurt him even as he is hurting himself. And so we read in verse 6, the text continues on, that when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and he fell down before him. That is, the demon-possessed man fell down before Jesus. Verse 7, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." I want you to notice how immediately the demons are just waving the white flag of surrender. The demons just say, we've got no chance. We realize we don't stand a chance against Jesus. We're not going to try to fight Jesus. That's going to be a losing battle on our part. They know that Jesus is in charge. They know that Jesus has power over them. They maybe are even aware of some of the demonic casting out miracles that Jesus has already done in some previous chapters. These demons recognize that they are beaten the moment that he arrives on the scene. Verse 8, for he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Now, a legion in a Roman army was, at least at one time, it was considered to be a division of 6,000 men. And whether that's the meaning by the name Legion here, that's supposed to mean 6,000 demons, or maybe it's just meant in a looser sense to just mean a lot. When we couple that with what's going to be said here in just a few minutes in verse 13 about the demons being put into 2,000 pigs, what we can come away with is just knowing this man is filled with a lot of demons. He's filled with possessed by potentially hundreds, possibly even thousands of demons at one time. And I can't help but just wonder, what is that like? I mean, and I don't wonder it because I want to know that and experience that for myself. I just wonder, and I feel for this man. What does that do? What kind of miserable existence has this man had to live? What kind of, demonic power has all been concentrated into this one vessel, into this one man? The disciples, if they didn't want to get out of the boat, I totally sympathize with them, because I wouldn't want to get out of the boat to try and confront this many demons all harnessed into this one place. But what Mark wants us to see is that Jesus never flinches. Not even for a second. Jesus doesn't flinch. The moment Jesus sees him, he starts saying, "Come out of this man. Come out of this man, you unclean spirit." The text continues on in verse number 10. Verse 10, and he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Verse 11, now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and they drowned in the sea. And the herdsmen fled, verse 14, and told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. Now, clearly, and I'm going to argue, that the focus here is on the power of Jesus. It's on how many demons he cast out all at once. It's how Jesus was able to subdue and bring this man down when nobody else was able to do that. It's about how Jesus commands these demons, all right, then you're going over here, and he sends them into that herd of pigs. Mark wants us to stand back and to be in awe of the unmatched power that Jesus the Christ possesses. And when Jesus sends those demons into the swine, they go crazy, just like the man had been crazy. They are just as out of control as the man had been. They rush down into the Sea of Galilee, and they drown. Now, of course, as soon as you say that, and as soon as you read those verses, here it comes. You know what's coming next. People are going to ask, well, what about those pigs? I want to know about those pigs. Why did Jesus send them into pigs? Why didn't Jesus just send them away into the ether, into the atmosphere, or wherever it is that spirit beings go? And why did Jesus choose pigs to do that with? What does it mean? Is there some special significance to that? And of course, there's all kinds of speculation about that. There's all kinds of explanations that are offered for that. My favorite explanation that one commentator gave, he said these pigs must have been owned by Jewish swine herders. Since Jews had no business raising pigs, this was Jesus' way of taking a swipe at these bad Jews who were obviously breaking kosher dietary laws. Well, that reads pretty good, but the text doesn't say that. There's nothing in Mark chapter 5, there's nothing in any of the other accounts that suggest that. We don't know that. That's nothing but speculation and conjecture. And really all that speculating does is it takes the focus off of where the focus needs to be. What's the focus? What's the main thing? I don't know much about demon possession, and I certainly don't know why Jesus sent these demons into pigs, but I know this. I know that the pigs are not important. What's important is this man who had been saved by the power of Jesus the Christ. When we get all fixated and focused on the pigs, we end up making the mistake that I think many of those people made. Verse 14, notice verse 14 again. Verse 14 says that the people came out to see what had happened. Then verse 15, they came to Jesus and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man, look at here, and to the pigs. Oh, there you go. It's all about the pigs. Hey, let me tell you about those pigs. Let me say, man, the pigs. This pig thing was just unbelievable. You got to know about all these pigs that went down into the sea. Verse 17, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. What we want to see from this miracle in Mark chapter 5 is that the destruction of the swine, as Jesus cast them out of this demon-possessed man, it shows clearly what the demons intended to do, and that is to kill and to destroy. And what we want to see is that Jesus delivered that man by his power. And we want to focus on that power. And I want to say something here at the end, if we can get to the end of the chapter, that Jesus offers that same power to us today to deliver us from the captivity and the dominion of Satan, to bring us over into his kingdom and to bring us under his subjection. Dad's made the comment that Jesus is showing us power over the demons, yes, over nature, as we just saw. We're going to see in just a moment over sickness, over death, and ultimately, most importantly for us, over sin. That's exactly right, and that's what Mark is just hammering away at in this particular section of Scripture. Notice again there in verse 17, though. Do you notice what happens when you get fixated on the wrong thing? Here's these people, they're all focused on the pigs. Maybe some people were concerned about that they had, lost some of their livelihood because of these pigs all being, these suicidal pigs. Verse 17, that says that they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. Sometimes when people don't understand, they get afraid. And when people focus on the wrong thing, they say dumb things, they make dumb decisions. And that's evident here with these people. These people decide, Jesus, we just think it'd be best if you just take your, dog and pony show, take your little, circus, and you just need to go somewhere else. We just can't have this around here anymore. It's caused people to be upset. It's causing some people to be scared. It's done some damage to some people's herds and to their livelihood here. We just need to ask you to just get out of here, get out of town. And notice what verse 18 says. The very first phrase of verse 18 says, as he was getting into the boat. That's a statement, if you got your journal, that's a statement worth underlining. Because what that statement shows us is that if you ask Jesus to go, he will go. He will. He'll leave. He will not beg and plead, oh, please, 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 let me do another miracle and maybe I can convince you. No. Jesus does not say, well, please, just let me explain myself. You're maybe just not understanding everything, and maybe if I give a little bit more information, maybe that'll help you out here. Nope. You ask Jesus to leave, you tell Jesus you're not interested in what he has and what he has to offer, then he'll go. He's not going to fight and claw and beg and plead for another opportunity. And I think about that often, and I think about our own efforts to share Jesus with other people. When we make efforts to spread the gospel, when we make efforts to invite, when we make efforts to strike up religious conversation, oftentimes we are going to be greeted with people who say, I'm not interested. Could you just take that somewhere else? Somebody else maybe would be interested. I don't want any of that. And our knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, could you please just give me another minute? Give me 5 more minutes of your time. But let me tell you about this verse. And we press and we press and we press. Maybe we need to take a cue from Jesus more often. We need to recognize when it is time to going to shake off the dust of our feet. Jesus is going to talk about that with his disciples here in a chapter or two about that you're going to have to do that from time to time. But Jesus makes it clear, you don't want the power that I have, you don't want the message that I have to offer, then all right, I'll take it elsewhere. I'll take it to some people who do want it. And so, verse 18. Verse 18, as he was getting into the boat, the man who'd been possessed with the demons begged him that he might be with him. So the formerly demon-possessed man is certainly thankful for what Jesus had done. Says, hey, can I come with you? Verse 19, but Jesus did not permit him, but he said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. That's a little bit different than Jesus' regular MO. In previous instances, we've noticed that Jesus has performed a healing, and he'll instruct the person, hey, I don't want you going and telling people. He'll say, say nothing to anyone. And there was a reason for that, and that's because Jesus was recognizing that there was going to be problems if everybody started knowing all of this? We already noticed some of those problems in previous chapters. In the last chapter, the people were hard pressed upon him, so much so that Jesus had to get into a boat out on the water so that he could actually be able to do some preaching. And that happens time and time again. People go say stuff about Jesus, gets people excited, and then the mobs just come thronging to Jesus, and it ends up limiting his ability to be able to get from place to place and to go where he needs to go and to accomplish the work that he needs done. And so it was oftentimes very prudent for Jesus to say, hey, I don't want you to say things about this. But in this case, he tells the guy, I do want you to go home. And I do want you to tell people about what's been done for you, what the Lord has done for you, about the mercy and the kindness that's been extended to you. And the reason for that he allows that in this instance, is because in this particular instance, this man is going back to a place that, as best we can tell, Jesus is never going to go again. He's going to a location, he's going to a city, into a region that, based on all the evidence we have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is never going to return to those places. And so Jesus instructs this man to, yes, you go and you speak of the goodness of the Lord. You go and speak of the kindness and the mercy and the compassion that's been extended to you, and make that known in your place, because those people do need to know about those things. And I think that probably is why Jesus gives him permission to do that. McKaylee's chimed in with what I dreaded someone was going to say or to ask. She says, not to take the focus off of Jesus, but even though the pigs died, I have always wondered what happened to the demons. And guess what, McKaylee? I've wondered that too. I don't know if when the demons went, or when the pigs went crashing into the water, if that meant the demons, somehow that meant the end of their existence as well. I don't know. I don't know if, they smashed into the water, and then the pigs all die, of course, and the demons then need to go find some other person or entity to possess later on. Maybe they did. Maybe they just returned back to the spirit realm, wherever that is and however that works. When we talk about spiritual beings and the spirit realm, we're just talking about things that are just beyond our knowledge and comprehension. The Bible gives us limited information on that, and since I've never been in the spirit realm, I've never been to heaven, never been to hell, certainly don't want to go to hell, never been to the Hadean realm, none of us can speak to that. And I'm reminded there was a verse that Daddy included in the comment section on the Sunday night lesson, I think it was, about how Paul was taken up into the third heaven, and he was exposed to things and shown things that he says he was not to tell and he was not to speak of. And so maybe there's a reason we're not to know all the details of all of those kinds of things. But that's a good question to save that for Q&A night when we get to heaven, because Jesus will be able to answer those kinds of questions definitively once and for all. Got the comment here from Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6, considering those who reject Jesus and reject what he had to offer, when Jesus said, don't give to dogs what is holy, and don't throw your pearls before pigs lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. And that's right. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when Jesus is kind of giving the limited commission to the disciples a little bit later on. The comments that said here about what happened to the demons that were in the pigs, maybe they got into the fish. Maybe so. I don't know how that would have affected the aquatic life there in the Sea of Galilee. I would have hated to have cast my line into the sea and to have caught a demon-possessed bass or something. That wouldn't have been good. But yeah, there's just lots of unanswered questions about that. So there's a place for us to think about that and to ask that, but we always want to be ready to keep the main thing the main thing, and the main thing is Jesus. And the people in verse 20, when this man goes back to his place, he went away and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone there marveled. And those people had the right reaction. The people back in the area of the Gerasenes, that's not the reaction that they had. They had kind of a fear, but it was not the right kind of fear. And I take it that the people in the Decapolis, in verse 20, the marveling, and if there was fear, it was the right kind of fear, the kind that would produce faith, or if nothing else, produce a desire to ask more questions about, well, tell us more about this Jesus, and we want to know more, and help us to know more. Let's continue on. Let's move past this section. Let's keep reading here. Verses 21 and 22. When Jesus had crossed again, so now he goes back to the other side, gets into the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. And there came to him one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he, that's Jairus, fell at his, that's Jesus' feet. Now, I want us to pause for a second and let's make sure that we see the significance of what is happening here. Who is this that's coming and falling at the feet of Jesus? A ruler of the synagogue? Are you serious? A person who is a representative of the religious establishment? The religious establishment, the scribes, the Pharisees, we're going to see more and more of the chief priests and the elders, etc. Those are the people that had been opposing Jesus. Those are the people that just a chapter or two ago we read are already starting the plot to destroy Jesus. We have a guy from that group who's now coming to Jesus and is actually coming and falling at Jesus' feet, the text says. This is astonishing to think about that this man is doing this. We're told that his name is Jairus, and we're told why he comes and falls at Jesus' feet. Verse 23, he implored Jesus earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." I want you to think about what this man is kind of casting aside in order to come to Jesus here. He's casting aside, first of all, his dignity, because the text says that he falls down at Jesus' feet. The impression is that he's falling down on his face. He's casting aside some of his prejudices, regardless of what he had heard about Jesus already and how, all of his coworkers are trying to destroy Jesus. All right, I'm setting all those thoughts aside and I'm coming to this man. He sets aside his pride. He's setting aside maybe even his friends, the very ones who were in opposition to Jesus. He's maybe even risking his job here as being the ruler of the synagogue. The ruler of the synagogue is the man who would have been in charge of the physical arrangements that would have needed to be done. He's going to be the one that's going to get the speakers set up and arranged. He's going to have all the books prepared on the Sabbath day. He's going to get all the physical things all set up and ready for the worship that would take place on the Sabbath day in the synagogue. And so the question is he still going to have a job? After all of this is over, after he's come to Jesus and humbled himself before the man from Galilee that his co-workers are totally against, if he identifies himself as a believer in Jesus, how are the powers that be? How are they going to look at that? Well, I like the fact that Jairus doesn't care, and he's not concerned about that. His concern here is, Jesus, I need you. I need you. My little daughter, she's sick, she's dying. Verse 24 then says, short little verse, but verse 24 says, and he went with him. He went with him. Dad's made the comment here that it was love for his daughter that moved him to come to Jesus. And yeah, we can say something about that even more in just a second, that, how many times has the sickness of oneself or of a loved one, or maybe even the death of a loved one, suffering, how often is it that those types of things cause people to suddenly be interested in God, they're interested in spiritual things, when prior to those things being in their life, they weren't interested at all. But now all of a sudden we start to have thoughts about eternity and sobering thoughts about our own mortality. And this man, whatever things might have been in the way prior to this, those things are completely demolished because now he comes and brings himself before Jesus. But that statement in verse 24, where it says that Jesus went with him, sometimes we just kind of run right past that. it's of interest to me that Jesus did not say, hey, buddy, I'm sorry, I just can't help you. You're part of that group. You're part of those people who are trying to destroy me. So I just don't really have time for you right now. I've only got time for the people who, are on my side. I don't want you to be stopping my mission. How do I know that you're not, some kind of a, wolf in sheep's clothing here? I just don't have time for you. Why don't you go ask your friends in Jerusalem? Maybe they'll be able to help you out and help your daughter. I got nothing for you. No. That's not what Jesus does here. That would be totally outside the character of Jesus. Instead, verse 24 says that he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. Think about that. This is an amazing scene. This man of the synagogue comes before Jesus. Please, Jesus, come with me. He comes. Jesus begins to go with him. Here's this whole big crowd. Now they're all starting to follow him. And if I'm reading this story for the very first time, I'm probably kind of on the edge of my seat. Man, what's going to happen next? What's it going to be like when Jesus ends up visiting this house of a ruler of the synagogue? And what about that daughter? How sick is she? Are they going to be able to make it in time in order for him to be able to help? But it's right there in the middle of all of that intensity that we read of this really sick woman. Verse 25. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians. And she had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. As if Jesus didn't already have enough on his plate, look at what happens to come along the way here. Now, we don't know the precise nature of this woman's affliction. It seems to be maybe a hemorrhage of some kind. We're not really certain why she suffered with it for these past 12 years. I kind of have always pictured in my mind that maybe this is not like an old woman, but maybe a younger woman or a middle-aged woman. We just got a lot of questions that we don't know about the woman and her problem, but what we can be certain of is that just like with Jairus, she sees her need for Jesus, and that's what we want to focus on here. I want us to remember, when we think about this woman's affliction, under the law of Moses, her disease would have made her ceremonially unclean, and actually she would have been ceremonially unclean like all the time. She would not be able to just go to the temple and to worship freely. She's not able to just get up and maneuver through society just like any other kind of normal person. And, of course, anyone then that touches her would be considered unclean as well. And so that means that she, and a lot of us can probably relate to this woman right now, she's very isolated. And if she's been dealing with this for 12 years, we've been dealing with this isolation thing for the last 5-6 weeks now, but this woman's been dealing with this for 12 years of her life, 12 years of, not being able to just, give a hug to her loved ones or to her friends, 12 years of just being and feeling miserable, and the text says it just got worse and worse. She's spent all of her money. The doctors can't even help her. There's obviously not a cure for what it is that's ailing her. Her health just continues to decline. But verse 27 says, she had heard the reports about Jesus, and so she came up behind him in the crowd, and she touched his garment. At this point in Jesus' ministry, people are wanting to get near to him. We noticed that already back in chapter 3 and in verse 10. People are wanting just to touch him because people thought, or they realized that, hey, just touching him could bring a healing. But look here in verse 27. This woman isn't even going to touch Jesus' physical body. She just reaches out and touches the hem of his garment, just the edge of his clothing. Verse 28. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. Don't you love that? Not a question of, well, I think I might be made well. No, I will. I'm going to. I'm confident of it. And it makes us wonder, what kind of power did Jesus possess? Can his clothes bring a healing? Come on. We know that he's powerful, but are even his clothes powerful? What we expect is that Jesus is maybe going to stop and he's going to, wave his hands, or he's going to say some magic words, or, poof up some smoke or something to accompany a big miracle here. And, of course, our mind also is kind of thinking, what about Jairus? he's still standing there. He's probably standing there waiting and probably, stomping his foot and kind of antsy. Come on, Jesus, what about my daughter? But we're wondering, how much power does Jesus really have for all of these different things? Verse 28 continues on. There's verse 28. Verse 28, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. Verse 29, and immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. When she touched Jesus, she felt something immediately. But here's the neat thing. So did Jesus. Jesus felt it too. Got a comment here about what it was that made her whole, and we're going to talk about that here just momentarily. Verse 30, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? Now, I don't think Jesus is asking this question about, who touched my garments because, he's upset in any kind of way. How dare you touch me? I don't think that's the issue here. I actually think what Jesus is wanting to do is he wants everyone else's attention to be drawn to this woman. Because what he's going to talk about and what he's going to say is he's going to say something about her faith. And that's the comment that I've got here from my mom, that it was her faith that made her whole. Verse 31, the disciples said to him, oh, Lord, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? Come on, Jesus, everybody's touching you. You're a celebrity. Of course people are touching you. We can't even, go anywhere without people wanting to have their hands on you. But what do you mean, who touched me? Verse 32, and he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. There's some tension there in verse 32 and 33. Is Jesus going to look at this woman and say, now, woman, you are unclean. How dare you touch me or touch even my clothes? You don't have any business being in this crowd, let alone going around and touching people. Who do you think you are? You're breaking the law of Moses. That's not what happens here. The woman, it seems like, very sheepishly, she comes, very humble, tells the truth. Yes, it was me. And what we see here is we see that Jesus ends up commending her for her faith. And we see that the power of Jesus, that's how it's accessed. It is accessed by faith. And I want to think about the fact that, yes, as Jesus says, it is her faith that makes her whole. But is it just faith by itself? Is it just, okay, she believed in her mind and in her heart that Jesus could heal her, and that's how that happened? I'm going to argue that it was an active faith. It was faith accompanied with action. There was activity. She had to go to where Jesus was. She reached out, put her hand upon his garment. There was actions that accompanied that faith. As one writer wrote, he says it was her actions motivated by faith that caused power to come forth out of Jesus. And I think that's exactly right. And here we get a good working definition of what Bible faith really is. That yes, there is the mental, the emotional component of understanding who the Lord is, but that then moves us to take action. And this woman has that. Her faith, I would suggest, is probably imperfect at this point. She doesn't know everything. In fact, in some ways, maybe it even reeks of a little bit of superstition here. But as incomplete as her faith is, it ends up accessing the power that Jesus has, and she is made well as a result of all that. Now, as we're amazed at all that, and people standing there would have been amazed by this scene, remember, Jairus is still standing there. And he's wondering, okay, lady, hey, I'm happy for you, glad that you've got your healing and things are well for you, but I've got a daughter. She's very, very ill. She's near to the point of death. Jesus, time is ticking here. We need to go. I need you to come and see about my daughter. And so verse 35, let's see if we can get this last little section real quick. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Now, up to this point, Jesus, he's calmed the stormy sea, he's cast out demons, he's healed sickness, he's healed disease, but this is something of a whole nother level entirely. This girl is dead. And so everyone's just knee-jerk response is, There's nothing that can be done. That's it. It's all over. It's finished. Verse 36. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Could you please tie together verse 36 with what was said back in verse 34? This is Jesus saying, Jairus, did you see just a few minutes ago what that woman had? That woman had faith. Jairus, that's what I need from you right now. Do not fear, only believe. We need some faith working here, buddy. Then verse 37. He allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. We're not entirely sure why Jesus made the other 9 apostles stay back and he just chose these 3. We'll kind of notice as we move along through Mark that Peter, James, and John do have a closer connection with Jesus, but not sure why he told the rest of them to stay back on this occasion. Maybe it was a smaller house and there just wasn't room. Whatever the case is, Jesus does want some eyewitnesses to be there, and so he selects these 3 to be just that. Verse 38, and they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. You should know that funerals in Jewish culture are a really big deal, and you actually were expected, even if you were impoverished, you were expected by custom to hire a minimum of 2 flute players and 1 professional wailer. Yes, there were people who their job, their trade, was to professionally cry and wail. Imagine that. Hey, what do you do for a living? Oh, I cry, I mourn, I weep for a living. Wow, that's an impressive skill. But that's what there was. And the people that are wailing here, yes, there may have been people that were doing it because they were paid to do it, but I tend to think there would have just been genuine sadness. I mean, a young girl from the community has died. We've had that happen in our community here in Pulaski County. Remember, there's a young lady from the high school that passed away last year, tragic. I didn't even know her or know the family, but there was sadness about it. I felt sadness. There was a connection because we know the people and there's a closeness, and that's what's happening here with this young lady's death. There's a lot of wailing and sadness. Verse 39, when Jesus had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? This child is not dead, but sleeping." Now, let's be abundantly clear. This girl is dead. Some people have looked at that and they try to argue, oh, she's just in a coma. She's not really dead. She's just in a coma, and that's why Jesus says she's sleeping. No. He's using sleep here as a metaphor, and it's used as a metaphor several times in Scripture. And I think the reason death is called a sleep is because it emphasizes that death is not a permanent state. You fall asleep, you're going to wake up. And the same thing with death. You're not going to be dead forever. Eventually, you're going to come up. You're going to come up out of that grave. No matter how long you've been dead, there's coming a day when we're all going to come out of that state. And the same thing here with sleep. And Jesus uses that idea, especially because he knows what's about to happen next here in about 2 seconds. Verse 40, and they laughed at him, but he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and he went in where the child was. And taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. Now, we might wonder why Mark records the Aramaic expression. That's what that Talitha cumi is. It's Aramaic. We might wonder, why does he include that? I think that may have something to do with Peter. If you remember 7 or 8 weeks ago when we started Mark, while we were still meeting here in the church building, made the point that there's long-standing tradition that much of Mark's gospel is influenced by the things that Peter had told him, Peter's eyewitness account of things. And I think there's a pretty good chance that this was something that Peter had retold to Mark. And Peter on that day was just so impressed upon him what he saw and what he experienced. I mean, he saw, I would assume for the first time in his life, he saw the power of Jesus to bring the dead to life. And that moment was just seared. It was burnt into Peter's memory, so much so that he remembered all kinds of details, that maybe he would have remembered exactly what that house looked like, how many people were there. He even remembered the exact words and expressions that were spoken that day, and he never forgot what he witnessed that day. He saw a demonstration of power that was unlike anything that he had ever seen, the power to give life to the dead. And so the text says in conclusion, verse 42, and immediately the girl got up, and she began walking, for she was 12 years of age, And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. And so just a few moments prior, there was people that were laughing at Jesus, but now everyone is overcome with amazement. And why? Because Jesus is exercising extraordinary power even over death. Now, these 3 episodes here in chapter 5, let me put all 3 of those ideas together for us to think about what that all means for us, and then we'll call it a night. We see in the first story, there's the power to rescue a man from the power of the devil. In the second story, we saw power that was accessed by faith with that woman. And then in the third story, there's faith being demonstrated yet again, but it is the power to bring from death unto life. And I want you to know that those exact same powers of Jesus are available to us in a spiritual sense for us today. And the New Testament bears that out. In Acts 26 and in verse 18, for example, it's said there, Jesus is the one speaking, that he is able to turn people from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to the power of God. Only Jesus is able to release us from the devil's dominion and the devil's control. And then as well, that power continues to be accessed by faith. Romans 1:16, that famous verse, that the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's faith that connects us to that saving power. And it is, Colossians chapter 2, it is faith in the powerful working of God that causes a sinner who's been plunged in the waters of baptism, causes us to pass from spiritual death to a state of being alive together with Him. And the amazing thing about that power in all 3 of those ways is that power is available to us even at this very moment. Here we are 2,000 years removed from Jesus performing all of these powerful and amazing miracles, and those powers are still available to us today in an even greater sense, the spiritual sense in which our lives can be made better and be made whole through Jesus Christ, through that faith that is accessible to us today. That's chapter 4 and chapter 5, and I appreciate you hanging in here with me tonight. Got started a couple minutes late because of the audio troubles. Quick programming note come up for Sunday. Sunday morning, in the sermon for Sunday morning, going to return back to our year-long preaching theme on marriage matters. So the next installment in our marriage series will be this Sunday morning. And then Sunday evening, for our evening Bible study, we took a 1-week hiatus to have Q&A this past week. But this coming Sunday, my dad's going to start our new study for Sunday nights, and that's going to be on the book of Revelation. And I asked him to do that, but he actually was also kind of ready to do that, thought that might be something that would be beneficial and folks would be interested in that. And so I'm looking forward to studying in Revelation and learning from that study. Looking forward to worshiping on Sunday as well. Hope you guys have a great week. Enjoyed getting to be with you all for this hour or so, and just love you all and miss you all and look forward to when we can be back together in person again. Thanks so much. Have a good night.